Thank you, Suwha, for joining me today. Super excited to talk about your journey, Indego Africa, the mission and vision, what it's up to. I started Cause Artist around, fashion 10 years ago. That was sort of the first sector I really focused on. That was traditionally the brands coming out back then were, hey, how do we solve social or economic issues through business? And it was, mainly through fashion brands and sort of, ethical fashion and that whole sort of renaissance a little bit. And since then, social entrepreneurship, social enterprise has exploded across a lot of different sectors. But before we get into everything, talk about your career arc, your journey before this. Talk about that roadmap a little bit personally.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, Grant, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm a huge fan and really just honored to be having this chat. Yeah, I've had a really sort of long and circuitous route to be in this spot where I am at Indigo Africa, but I think in the long run, or just from a bird's eye perspective, all roads led to here. And I just really feel very fulfilled by ending up in this particular nonprofit at this particular time with the tools in my toolkit that I've been able to amass through my
Yeah.
journey. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Morningside Heights on 118th Street. My mom actually is a anthropologist. And so curiosity about other cultures and how things are done and how people relate to each other has always been a part of my DNA. So I basically grew up on campus at Columbia while she was getting her PhD.
Mm,
And I went to school where I was the only not Black or Hispanic kid in my class. So I've always been a bit of an outsider looking in. I also wasn't an immigrant. I was a child of a PhD student. So I didn't have a immigrant community to fall back on.
mm,
So I think it made me very keenly aware of connections and people from kind of like an outsider perspective
yeah.
always. And then my mother received her PhD and moved back to Korea to start a teaching career. And I went to a boarding school in New England and was put in a very different situation then, a very elite boarding school with a very certain set of students and environment. But I got a great education, went on to a liberal arts school in Vermont, and then I went straight to law school from there. So I did a lot of very traditional Northeast schooling.
Yeah.
And out of that, I ended up practicing law for 5 years straight out of schools. So basically, it was didn't know what I didn't know. And I just thought, let's go for the hardest thing that you can imagine. And in
Yeah.
my realm of and the option of things that are possible when you grow up in that circumstance, that just seemed like the thing to do. I practiced litigation for 5 years, 2 years in New York and 3 years in Boston. And I learned so much. But I also learned that I am a terrible lawyer. So I decided to throw in the towel after my 5th year, but had some really wonderful mentors and like great learnings and learning how to bring focus to really hard situations because as a litigator, you only are called on when there's a really big problem. So
Me.
it really groomed me for the next phase, which was I decided to just dive headlong into the fashion world, which seemed like a very big pivot, but one that I thought was my calling. And it wasn't necessarily fashion. It was more that I wanted to work in a tangible product and in a
Hmm.
design space. So I was married at that point, and my husband and I moved to London. And I retrained going to night school for a year. And then I started my own fashion brand called Suwha. And it was addressing of what I saw as a hole in the market for an accessible, high contemporary price point clothing line, kind of in the vein of Burberry, but
Hmm.
at a like $400 to $1,000 price point, but very structured pieces, accessories, and it was actually a wild ride. In the first season, I was able to get global distribution. Basically, I was able to get into a lot of really amazing stores in North America and Europe and also in Japan. And then the market crash of 2008 happened.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
I'm sorry, 2000, was that 2008?
9? 2008 or 9. Yeah.
2009 happened, yes.
Yeah.
And so I really then needed to learn how to scale back and make do with diminishing smaller and smaller purchase orders from the buyers who are then trying to make sense of their own businesses. But I was able to run it for 5 years out of London. And then after that, I had a family. I had two kids in London at that point. So we decided to move back to New York because we wanted to have some roots in America because we knew that we wouldn't stay in the long term in Europe. So I came to New York and had basically no connections in the fashion world where I wanted to stay. And I also had no idea what part of fashion I belonged in because I had been an entrepreneur. So you kind of have to do everything.
Yeah.
So I hustled for about a year and I found myself a job as creative director of a brand that no longer exists. That was called Cynthia Stuffy. It had been a runway brand and it was in the process of being brought into a company where the brief was to make it profitable again. So to be able to bring the price points down and attract a different customer and kind of focus the brand so that it appealed to a mass market. And for me, from my background of really being a small business owner, I thought, great, like that seems like a great
Yeah.
challenge, but I entered it from the creative side. So from that point on, I just have been for the last, I think, 16, 17 years on every side of the fashion and commerce business
Yeah.
that you can imagine. I've been solely on the creative side. I've been solely on the business side. At one point, one of my favorites is I worked at Zola.com, which is the
Yeah.
wedding registry and planning
Yeah.
platform. Love that experience because it was taking what I know from fashion and commerce and applying it to a zero inventory model tech company. So that was so fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been kind of all over the map because also in that time, fashion and commerce has gone through so much change.
Yeah. For sure.
When I started in 2007, e-commerce really wasn't a thing yet. And I built a e-com site, and the fact that I had an e-com site made it into what was then this really novel concept called Daily Candy, which was like a blog that came into your Hotmail account.
Love it.
So yeah,
Great name.
so all these things just changed so rapidly. And so at every inflection point in the last 16, 17 years, I've been trying to grapple with like, how can I innovate my skill set and my interests with what's happening right now? And yeah, and just have impact in a business.
Going back to your days as a lawyer, what you said, you found out you were a terrible lawyer. Was it the fact that you sort of weren't as passionate about it, and it sort of you just didn't have that drive to be a great lawyer? Was it being in the courtroom and litigating with that is that part that you were not, like, was it a passion thing, or was it, you looked around and you said, "Look, there's better people than me in this industry. I need to go find something I could be great at."
I think it was all of the above.
Yeah.
I think it was mostly my interest level in the law,
Yeah.
which is at the
Yeah,
crux
sure. I
of the
mean,
job.
you need to be 100% love that. Like, you don't.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, my friends and I laugh because I think so many people go to law school straight out of college, especially back then than we did. Half of our class, our law school class, had gone straight, and I think I went because I watched many episodes of L.A. Law when I was a kid, and I just wanted to
Sure.
wear a cool suit. And so we used to divide our class into law lovers and non-law lovers. Like if you really
Ah,
were a law
interesting.
lover, you were meant to be in law school. If you are not a non-law lover, then you are just kind of biding your time to do something else with your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get into Indigo Africa. So I guess talk about obviously that is maybe the mission and vision, and maybe what was it about it that drew you to this, to become CEO and sort of dedicate, this next part of your life to this platform and to this organization.
I gotten to the point in my career in fashion where I felt like I needed to have more of the why. I started to
Mhm.
feel like I was losing my why. And so I knew that I wanted to join either a company that had a purpose or a nonprofit. So I
Mhm.
was actively looking for that piece. But Indigo Africa in particular was very interesting for me because of the products themselves. I when I saw the product and I saw how much care and attention and beautiful the products were and what
Yeah.
could be done, like the potential of that as not only an item for a customer, but as a tool for fundraising and really highlighting what artisans do in Africa. I just thought there's so much here. So it was basically the product, and then I started to meet the team and get to know the culture and the impact, and I was just blown away by all the things that I was, learning.
So when you're trying to, let's say pitch somebody or just tell them about the organization, how do you approach that? Because it does a lot of things. Do you simply say, hey, we are sort of a e-commerce fashion brand that empowers refugee artisans across Africa that make beautiful products? You give them a sort of tech platform to empower them and make a career for themselves. Like how do you talk about what the organization is?
At the heart of the organization, I believe, is connection, is connecting the most marginalized artisan in the most marginalized communities and connecting them to the export market. And for me,
Mhm.
that visual is just stunning. And I was able to go to Rwanda and Ghana as CEO, my first trip as CEO last month. And it is really remarkable. These women have this amazing craft that needs to be valued for what it is, which is beautiful craft. And what we do is we connect their craft to be able to be in the most high level Madison Avenue boutiques around the world. We actually are far more, we do a lot more than what we currently say on
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
website. We're actually about to launch our brand new website, which can tell a more fulsome story. We have really amazing relationships with high end customers such as Tori Birch. We're doing a collaboration with her right now.
Oh, that's very
Yeah, and we just launched a really great collaboration with a Asian company called Urbanique. And we did a great collaboration with Shinola, the watch brand,
Mhm.
for a great bag that was a part of that was made in Ghana. So we have these partnerships and we are the bridger, we're the connector. So that's how I'd like to distill down what our mission is and what our power is the ability to make this impossible connection possible.
When you made that trip, it's a little bit fresh in your mind, which is great. Talk about, like, when I always like to see that with we make purchases, right, as consumers. There's some that are sort of ordinary and do certain things, and then there's some that have a much more, impactful back end, let's say, of what happens after you do something like that, after you purchase, something off your platform and many others out there. I guess talk about the on sort of the ground impact and sort of empowerment and positivity that comes from, having income, for these women on the ground. What's the economic impact? What's the family impact? What's the just the overall sentiment of, the women who, are making these beautiful products and then customers buying them? I guess what happens on the ground? What are sort of some of the real things that you saw when you went that, the power of consumerism is can be quite substantial. I guess talk about what you saw on the ground there and, what
Yeah.
customers are sort of, doing and impacting it and then not maybe even realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer something called what we call the small business incubator. We run a consortium of programs that all work together so that this connection to the export market is possible for our artisans.
Yeah.
And what that means is that our artisans can stay in their communities. We don't work, we work incredibly inefficiently if you look at us as a business because we service
They
the artisans in every way that we can. So for example, in Rwanda, we work with 17 cooperatives, and each of those
wow.
cooperatives are their own businesses. They don't work for Indigo. We are the connectors and the supporters. We're not the employers. So our team on the ground, we have an amazing Rwandan in-country team of five members who are just incredible humans. And they travel, our production team travels every single day of the week to all 7 regions of the country to go to the cooperatives in the rural communities where they are and distribute the purchase orders that we garner from the US. They then travel to make sure that we are doing the QC. They travel to make sure that the artisans have the raw materials that they need. They travel to make sure that they have support in terms of refresher courses on how to run a small business. All these things, because we have the order, we're able to sell on the product. So not only are we taking the profit from the item that you purchased and giving that back to the artisan for their time and craft, but we're also taking the margin that otherwise would be considered profit for a business, and we're putting it back into providing all of the things that these artisans need in order to be able to engage in this export market. So making that one purchase, you think you're, giving back in one way, you're giving back in so many ways. You're giving back not just the amount that we then pass on to the artisan, but you're giving back in the additional vocational training, in the
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, mentorship that we give, like all the different things that will help them become self-sustaining entrepreneurs in the long term is what that purchase does for the people on the ground. And they're so grateful. It's really amazing to watch.
And what is sort of I guess we can't really paint a broad brush, but I guess what is their sort of, where are they at in their stage of life? Or they're young women, older women, have they moved around a bunch? Are they, currently refugees, or have they settled down, in an area where, they're sort of, committed there now for a long time? I guess maybe take us a little bit to the background of, again, everybody's gonna be so different.
Mhm.
But what are sort of some of the backgrounds of these women, and how have they what has their lives been like?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we started in Rwanda in 2007. Our founder, his name is Matt Mitro. He grew up in Nigeria as his father worked for an oil company. So he really wanted to, he's also a recovering lawyer. This is what happens when you're a non-law lover. You find other things to do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so he really wanted to give back. And so 2007, he went to Rwanda because he had family connections there. And he identified a couple of existing cooperatives that were making these beautiful crafts. And he thought, oh gosh, I could take these back to the US and sell them for you, and you could have the profits. And so that's how Indigo Africa started. So we have kept that as our core. We meet the artisans where they are. And now
Mhm.
we service. Currently, we have 700 artisans that we support.
Wow.
Um, and our production team knows every single one of them by name. It's really amazing. So our impact is very deep and it's really enduring. It may not be the most like scalable, but we have been with these women, some of these women for many, many years. And so most of the women are in rural areas because if they're in the urban areas, I think there's other sources of income that they can tap into. But in some of these rural areas, this craft, the weaving, for them is a heritage craft. So it's been passed
Mhm.
on from generation to generation.
So you had mentioned earlier about, 2007, and building an e-commerce store back then. That had to be intense, and I was probably just as difficult as law school back then. Uh,
Oh yeah,
but
it was yeah, very difficult.
but now there's right, so technology has taken a great leap. It can empower, like these 700 cooperatives can now sort of be online in one
Yeah.
ecosystem, right? I mean, or 700 people, throughout these cooperatives, in another part of the world, right? It's kind of just phenomenal what has happened. Talk about how, I guess, technology has played a huge role in Indigo's Africa sort of growth, and or its next evolution and its next stage. You mentioned that you're revamping the whole site, and I'm sure it's going to be beautiful, and it's just going to take the organization to another level. But I guess talk about how you've seen technology really play a role in sort of, the impact arena and empowering people, specifically in your space, around the world. There's so many platforms that now, can onboard these artisans. The hard work is just kind of, on the ground, right? Getting them together, and building this sort of ecosystem where they then can be ready to go online and produce. But that part, the technology part is there. And just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You've seen the evolution from a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a lot of work to be done because I think because we work with the most rural communities in these countries, it's
Yeah.
not an accurate representation of like how connected Rwanda or Ghana are. We're traveling to the like outer edges of
Yeah.
connectivity in those regions. So I think we were running more technical trainings in our offices, either in Kumasi in Ghana or in Kigali in Rwanda, to service the community. Not necessarily, they didn't necessarily have to be our artisan partners. We were trying to just give back to the community in terms of giving more technical skills back to where we were in the primary office. But I think we still have connectivity issues when we're out in the field. We're not always able to have reliable access to the internet. But it is really remarkable. Everyone now has a phone. And
Yeah.
everyone now,
Sure.
almost all cooperatives, at least one member has a smartphone. So we're really trying to leverage, trying to connect the dots and make working in this export market ecosystem easier and feasible. So at least just on one level, just the communication that we can reliably have at least WhatsApp to be able to communicate
Sure.
is very key. So oftentimes when we have sampling or production or QC issues where we need a visual, it's been amazing to be able to say like, can you just show me a picture of that, or what exactly are you talking about? Can you send some video of the technique? So just that connection. So it's like we're a few steps behind what is possible in those two countries because we're in the rural places.
Yeah.
But even the ability to be able to share images instantaneously is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, Starlink would be perfect. It's like the perfect scenario to use Starlink to get internet anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
they had the Starlink Mini just came out, and now it's like is smaller and like more affordable, and like that's something that you can easily travel with because it's like fit the backpack
I
type
will
of
look
thing.
into that. I hadn't
So
thought of
that would be
that until
something
you
that
just mentioned it.
so that could be, I think, a really powerful way, even if you just had high speed internet for, a couple hours a day or something like that. When the crew's out there, you can sort of get the orders in through the app because they'll have, I don't know if you build it on Shopify or something like that, but just having one app, one phone at each cooperative that has the Shopify app, and then like Starlink, they can get orders, in real time or, within 24 hours. And that could sort of, maybe alleviate some of the manual stuff, but there's still so much, with rural areas, even in America, it's still a challenge to kind of, do certain things. I want to talk a little bit about, coming on as like CEO and maybe putting your CEO like transitional hat on a bit, like coming into an organization. What was that like? Like, what did you assess? What were some of the first things that maybe you had to take care of, or you had to look at, or you had to learn personally? Maybe what was like those first 30, 60 days like for you coming into an organization and trying to assess it and then, set it up for continued success?
One of our board members, who is also an executive director herself,
Yeah.
characterized it as drinking from a fire hose. And I said, yes. It was exactly that. It was drinking from a fire hose because we have so much history. I mean, we've been around since 2007. So there's so much history to the organization to learn. And also, two, we are sort of two different entities smushed together in a really beautiful way, but still two different. We are a nonprofit, so we have all of the operational challenges and benefits of being a nonprofit. And we also run this commerce arm that is sort of the engine for what we do on the impact side. So it's learning two different systems. And so the commerce side was quite easy for me to get my head around. The nonprofit side has been a steep learning curve for me because this is my first role other than having been involved as a student in lots of nonprofits, leading a nonprofit without having been, an employee of a nonprofit before. So that was a huge learning curve, but it's been wonderful. Like I just feel like the motivators of the stakeholders are different in this space. And so I've had to kind of understand how to communicate in a different way and how to align people together in a different way when I'm just used to the bottom line being the the one thing that aligns everyone, like, is this gonna make money or not, used to be the
Sure.
final decider. Is That's just not the case here. So there's been so many learnings, but it's been really beautiful. The one thing I will say though is I want to bring some of the startup fashion slash commerce hustle into the organization because I think there's so much potential from a product side that I just can't say enough about. We just make beautiful handcrafted product, and I just think we need to introduce it more to the world.
I'll kind of end on, a little bit about the future. And, I know there's, especially working in, fashion and working in, developing regions and rural areas within developing regions. I guess, what are the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years look like? I know that's a long time, but, maybe even 3 to 5. What are some of the goals and successes you and the organization would like to achieve?
We have been such a steady presence in these artisans' lives. Like many of the artisans that we work with now have been with us for so many years. One of our
Hmm.
production team members was an artisan with us. She was one of our cooperative member artisans from the very beginning in 2007, and now she's on staff. And so I just really hope that I can carry on the kind of deep impact that we've had for the last 16 years. I think that's a huge responsibility that I feel, and I know we can do because we've been doing it for all these years. And then if I can do that, which I am hoping that I can do, I really would love to be able to expand our impact and to be able to bring this amazing suite of support that we do through the small business incubator to more artisans in rural communities in Africa. Maybe we can expand into another country. I think we have just been very good at this deep impact that I think it needs to be widened.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, it's gonna be a really, I think, great adventure for you and the team as you get the new site up. You sort of get your learnings, you understand the ecosystem a bit more. I just think there's so much, like you say, growth and scale that could happen with, a little bit of, like I said, that startup maybe mentality of, how do we get things done? How do we scale? There's so much opportunity out there. Where can we be present more? Where can we play that, makes sense? Again, the products kind of speak for themselves, right? So it's really just getting in front of buyers, getting in front of consumers as much as possible, right? Because the products do speak for themselves. And so that's a great advantage to have, let's say, is that the product is beautiful and amazing. Like that's a great first step. Many people just don't have that. So, well, best of luck for you and the team for the next decade to come. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you're busy, and I always appreciate people taking the time. Thanks so much.